Canto 2, Chapter 7, Scheduled Incarnations. In 2 verses, 6, 9, and 10, you volunteers. Go on. No? No volunteer? 2 volunteer here. Okay. So you can read.
Text 9?
Text 9.
Okay.
9 and 10. Okay. You can do 9 and 10.
Maharaja Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this King Vena was burnt with his good deeds, and opulence was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce.
The Lord appeared as the son of Sudevi, the wife of King Nabhi, and was known as Rishabdev. He performed materialistic yoga to equal balance the mind. This stage is also accepted as the highest perfectional situation of liberation, wherein one is situated in oneself and is completely satisfied.
So we'll read the purport, Sanskrit purport for text number 9. I had the meter for this yesterday. Let's see. yeah, I think it's those. Yadvenam uppatagatam dvijavakya vajra.
Yadvenam uppatagatam dvijavakya vajra.
Nishpushta parushabhagam niraye patantam.
Nishpushta parushabhagam niraye patantam.
Chatvartito jagati putra padam chalebhe. Dugdha vasuni vasudha sakalani yena. Yadvenam utpatagatam dvijavakya vajra. Nishpushta parushabhagam niraye patantam. Chatvartito jagati putra padam chalebhe. Dugdha vasuni vasudha sakalani yena. Yadvenam utpatagatam dvijavakya vajra. Nishplushta parushabhagam niraye patantam. Chatvartito jagati putra padam chaleve. Dugdha vasuni vasudha sakalani yena. So Yadvenam utpatagatam dvijavakya vajra. Nishplushta parushabhagam niraye patantam. Chatvartito jagati putra padam chaleve. Dugdha vasuni vasudha sakalani yena. Do the word for word together. Yet when Venam unto King Vena, Utpata Gatam, going astray from the righteous path, Dvija of the Brahmanas, Vakya, words of cursing, Vajra, thunderbolt, Nishpusta, being burnt by, Purusha, great deeds, Bhagam, opulence, Niraye, into hell. Patantam, going down. Chatva, by delivering. Artitaha, so being prayed for. Jagati, on the world. Puchapadam, position of the sun. As well as Lebhe, achieve. Dugda, exploited. Vasuni, produce. Vasudha, the earth. Sakalani, Yena, by whom? Maharaj Vena went astray from the path of righteousness, and the Brahmanas chastised him by the thunderbolt curse. By this, King Vena was burnt with his good deeds and opulence, and was en route to hell. The Lord, by his causeless mercy, descended as his son, by the name of Prithu, delivered the condemned King Vena from hell, and exploited the earth by drawing all kinds of crops as produce. Any volunteers would like to read the purport?
According to the system of Varnashram Dharma, the pious and learned Brahmanas were the natural guardians of society. The Brahmanas, by their learned labor of love, would instruct the administrator kings on how to rule the country in complete righteousness, and thus the process would go on as a perfect welfare state. The kings, or the Kshatriya administrators, would always consult the counsel of the learned Brahmanas. They were never autocratic monarchs. The scriptures like Manu Samhita and other authorized books of the great sages were guiding principles for ruling the subjects, and there was no need for less intelligent persons to manufacture a code of law in the name of democracy. The less intelligent mass of people have very little knowledge of their own welfare, as a child has very little knowledge of its future well-being. The experienced father guides the innocent child towards the path of progress, and the childlike mass of people need similar guidance. The standard welfare codes are already there in the Manu Samhita and other Vedic literatures. The learned Brahmanas would advise the king in terms of those standard books of knowledge and with reference to the particular situation of time and place. Such Brahmanas were not paid servants of the king, and therefore they had the strength to dictate to the king on the principles of scriptures. This system continued even up to the time of Maharaj Chandragupta, and the Brahmana Chankaya was his unpaid prime minister. Maharaj Vena did not adhere to this principle of ruling, and he disobeyed the learned Brahmanas. The broad-minded Brahmanas were not self-interested, but looked to the interest of complete welfare for all the subjects. They wanted to chastise King Vena for his misconduct, and so prayed to the Almighty Lord as well as cursed the king. Long life, obedience, good reputation, righteousness, prospects of being promoted to higher planets, and blessings of great personalities are all vanquished simply by disobedience to a great soul. One should strictly try to follow in the footsteps of great souls. Maharaj Vena became a king, undoubtedly due to his past deeds of righteousness, but because he willfully neglected the great souls, he was punished by the loss of all above-mentioned acquisitions. In the Vamana Purana, the history of Maharaj Vena and his degradation are fully described. When Maharaj Prithu learned about the hellish condition of his father, Vena, who was suffering from leprosy in the family of a Malacha, he at once brought the former king to Kurukshetra for his purification and relieved him of all sufferings. Maharaj Prithu, the incarnation of God, descended by the prayer of the Brahmanas to rectify the disorders on earth. He produced all kinds of crops, but at the same time he performed the duty of a son who delivers his father from hellish conditions. The word putra means one who delivers from hell, called put. That is a worthy son.
I was born in the ignorance, darkness, but my eyes were opened by the torchlight of knowledge. My spiritual master, I offer my obeisance. So this thunderbolt curse, it mentions Brahmana is chastised with the thunderbolt curse. So King Vena was misbehaving. This thunderbolt curse. The Brahmanas, because they only spoke the truth, they were honest. The Brahmana will speak the truth even if the result is his own demise. Because their principle is honesty. They have to speak the truth. And there's many, many examples of this in the Srimad Bhagavatam. If in speaking the truth it means something would happen that would be unfortunate for them, so be it. And because of this, because they only spoke the truth, they never spoke anything untrue. When they made a curse, it was how do you say, a thunderbolt curse. It couldn't be refuted or rejected. And so the King Venu was misbehaving very badly. So they basically said, okay, this is it. You have to die. They tried to persuade him. This is a short version. They spent a lot of effort trying to convince him to change his ways, and he refused. So finally they said, okay, time for you to go. And then he died, which is just an interesting point. But what does this have to do with us as kings of ancient bygone times and monarchy? And we're very proud in America. We're very proud of democracy. We formed this democratic government. Although, as pointed out in the purport, you end up with a system that a lot of people with values that may not be so elevated will vote for someone who they relate to. And so you end up getting rulers who may not have such good qualities because a lot of the population may not have such good qualities. But ultimately, two takeaways for me in this verse, although it may feel like these kings in faraway places and faraway times with monarch rulers and brahmanas who speak only the truth, we don't see that in today's society. But there's 2 points, at least for me, 2 points coming out of this are that we're not independent, right? We have to accept an authority. Everybody has to accept an authority. In Vedic times, when there was a righteous ruler, yes, the king was an absolute controller, you could say. Whatever he said happened. But a righteous ruler never made decisions on his own. He would be consulted by the Brahmanas. And the Brahmanas were knowledgeable. Here's mentioned the Manu Samhita and other scriptures. There is authoritative information given to us in the forms of the Shastras, Bhagavad Gita, Bhagavatam, so many Puranas. There's knowledge coming from above by which to guide us. Modern society, we say, oh, these things are ancient, they're irrelevant. Now we need something modern. What do these things know? And that's because we have this disease of independence. We think that we can come up with something that hasn't been done before. The reality, if you study very closely all different scriptures, you realize there's nothing you can think of, there's nothing you can do that hasn't happened before, that somebody hasn't thought of. The very fact that you have some ideas means those ideas are already there. We talked about this, I think, last time in terms of creativity with musicians and artists and things. If you look at very prolific authors or musicians, and you ask them, how do you write so many songs? Often they'll say that they don't know. They just come to them. They just think, and they just have to grab a pen and write down. And then there's the Akashic records and so many different mystical things. But basically, all this knowledge, everything is there. Super soul is there feeding us information, and we think we originated. Oh, I came up with this great idea. This great idea most likely came from super soul or some other source, and then we take credit for it. So this sense of independence and this tendency to not want to surrender to an authority, this is our disease. This is the material disease. And that's what's being described here by King Vena. He had this disease. It's not the problem of monarchy. Once devotees were talking with Srila Prabhupada, they were debating monarchy versus democracy. Of course, Prabhupada used to call it demon crazy. It's democracy, so-called democracy. But Prabhupada actually said communism, monarchy, democracy, he said, But the bottom line, it doesn't really matter which one you have. You need righteous rulers at the top enforcing it, because otherwise it gets polluted. And if you don't have righteous officials all the way from the top down, then any system is going to not work. And if you have righteous people, any system can work. So it's not the point of this system versus that system. It's the point of the persons in charge. Are they God conscious or not? Do they understand that they're not this body? Do they understand the purpose of human life? Do they understand how to govern people so that they're happy? In Vedic times, when there was some big festival, that we hear about the Rajasuya sacrifice, so many kings would perform big sacrifices. Before they did that, they would go feed all the Sudras, give them clothes, make sure all the lower, so-called lower rungs of society, just the workers, not for middle class, that they were happy, that their needs were met. Then they would do their ceremony, because everybody would be satisfied. Today, if you have some big government affair or some big festival or something very important going on, they'll put a fence around it and you have to buy a ticket. And if you're not on the right list to get invited to come in, you can't come in. And everyone else stay outside and suffer, be homeless. We don't care. We're going to do our thing. We're going to have our state dinner or whatever it may be. So this is not a rule according to Vedic injunction. So this idea of authority, it strikes very deep in its heart, especially in the West. In America, we're raised with this natural. America is very proud. Most Americans, American culture, as one said, American culture is no culture. It's the culture of America is lack of culture. But anyway, Americans are very proud of being independent and very fiercely, look, we can do, we can be whatever you want to be. It doesn't matter what your background is, you can achieve things. And spiritually, there's some truth to that. But materially, there's karma, there's different situations. And it's not that we can just go and conquer and take things over by our sheer force of will. And this is the American ideology, right? I'm number one. We don't have to surrender to any other so-called authority. But it's false. It's completely illusory because we are not independent. We've talked about this before. We can't even control our breathing or our heartbeat or our eyes blinking. Try to not blink your eyes. You can hold it for some time and eventually they're going to blink. Try to make your heart stop beating or try to make it beat at a different pace. And I guess if you do jumping jacks, you can speed it up a little bit, but your heart's going to beat at a certain rate based on your health and whatnot. Hold your breath for as long as you can. Eventually, you're going to have to take a breath of air. Our nervous system, I don't know how many functions there are for the body to maintain. There's so many different intricate nervous system. You've got a cooling system. You've got all these different systems that make the body function. How many of us have control over any of these? We don't. We just hope they work. We try to eat right and exercise and do the right things so they work well. But the point is, these are complicated systems, and we're not in control of them. So how do we think we're independent? We're dependent upon there being oxygen in the air. If there's not enough oxygen, we can't breathe. Do we have any control over the oxygen in the air? Not really. We can get an air purifier or get an oxygen tank, but we have to trust there's oxygen in the tank. So at a very base level, we're dependent. That's just our constitutional position. We're dependent. And therefore, we require assistance from outside of ourselves. And as theists, as persons, devotees, or any spiritualists who accept there's a supreme controller, then we can accept this knowledge from above, so to speak. And through accepting that knowledge, then we can be very happy. If we reject that, we say, no, there's no God, it's just a big bang, and there's a whole ludicrous thing about how everything can come out of nothing. But that's a different topic. But if we say there's no God, it's just all what's so-called evolution or just all manual, then we get lost and we have to make up these democracies. We have to make up all these rules how to function in a society. And they might work to some extent, but they'll be flawed. Not everyone will be satisfied. And ultimately you'll have chaos and friction. So these are some of the points here. And King Vena didn't understand that. For the righteous rulers, if the king in Vedic times, and this is fact, sometimes these books are seen as mythology or stories from times of old. I may have mentioned this before, but I had overheard an interesting discussion once. I used to work as administrative assistant to Bhaktivinoda Institute. It would blow my mind the lunch conversations they would have every day. It's just their idle, so-called idle talk. Not they're serious when they're working on a project, but when they're just relaxed talking. So they had a long list of projects that they would probably never get to because there was too many of them and not enough funds. But they kept the list. So as we get time and money, these are the things we want to do. And one of them was a book. Sadhguru wanted to write it, showing there's a document in Puri that lists every king that's ruled India, all down to modern time today. So today, king is this one. For him was this one. For him was this one. So there's, based on that document and some other evidence, there's some archaeological coins they've dug up, different things. Sadhguru was convinced he could write a book to show historically that Maharaj Yudhisthira and Arjuna were real people. They were historical figures. Kurukshetra was an actual battle. It wasn't some allegory that, trying to control the senses and the 5 horses or whatever. There's different theories people come up with, but basically show that down to Mahabharata, or from between here and Mahabharata, is actual historical fact. In fact, that's what Mahabharata is. It's itihasa, it's history. And so these things aren't mythological, they're actual facts in that they happen. And so according to Vedic culture, the way things used to happen in the past, if the king was very pious, the rain would water, ideally would rain at night, so you didn't bother your day, and then everything got watered, and so then everything grew very nicely. There would be no sickness, there'd be no disturbance. Society, if citizens got sick, they would say, okay, the king is doing something wrong. Things are out of whack. This was Vedic culture, a very pious king. His concern was the welfare of his people, make sure everybody's happy. Not just his advisors and the top echelon of executives, but everyone, all the farmers out in the field. There was no sense. So in ashram culture, there's no sense of lower class or higher class. Everybody's, spiritual entities. They just have different propensities. And we saw that. We talked about Jayananda previously. He did a lot of so-called Sudra work. He would build carts and different things. But of course, he's a devotee, so it's transcendental. But the point is, whether one is reciting mantras or farming in the field, they're both spiritual if they're done for Krishna. So pious king understood that. Prabhupada says in many places, the duty of the leaders is to engage people in serving the Supreme Lord. And so anyway, so it's a much different culture from what we see here, but that's what's being based here. King Vena wasn't following this, the citizens were unhappy, and disease was, all these unfortunate things were coming. So they could understand he wasn't fulfilling his duty properly. But for us, at least for me, what comes out of this is the understanding that there are scriptures, there is knowledge. Whether I can read Manusamhita, I can understand these scriptures or not, I need to find someone who can and take this advice, because every living entity is a child of the Supreme Lord. Therefore, just as a parent is responsible for the education of their child, but the parent doesn't let the child run out in the street, get hit by a car, it says, no, you can't behave that way. So any responsible parent will put constraints around the child and teach the child how to behave until it grows up to a point where it can function on its own. So in the same way, Krishna provides for all of his children, all living entities who are lost in this material world trying to find enjoyment. He gives them knowledge, he gives them instructions through saintly personalities and through different scriptures as to how to behave, how to live, so that they can be happy. And Prabhupada would often say, be happy in this life and the next. So our Krishna consciousness or our spiritual activities isn't just a pie in the sky, I'm going to do these things, so my next life I'll be happy. Yes, it's true, in your next life you will be happy, but if you do these things, you'll be happy in this life. Happiness is your inherent right. So if you simply follow the program that's been designed for you, you'll be happy, guaranteed. You'll be forced to be happy. Here, take this happiness. No more suffering. Let me take that suffering away and let me give you this happiness. And that's this program. It's everything Prabhupada's given is according to Vedic culture, according to the injunctions is laid down by ultimately Lord Brahma and Lord Krishna. And so when we understand this and we get over this deep-seated independence, and we understand that I'm fully dependent, there's a nice song I like by George Harrison. I don't remember all the lyrics, I don't remember the melody, but there's I don't remember the name of the song, but there's a line in the song where he says, I couldn't even find the door. I couldn't, I just couldn't function if it wasn't for you. Without for you, sunshine, I forget all the lyrics, I don't know if anyone remembers, but when you listen closely, he's talking about Krishna ultimately. It could be the spiritual master also, but this one phrase, I couldn't even find the door. If you're ever stuck in a room, the light's out, and you don't know where's the light switch, I'm bumping into the couch, I can't, you need some help. Somebody turn on a light. How do I get out of this place? And so if you've ever been in that situation where you're feeling very lost and you don't know, do I turn right? Do I turn left? Where do I do? This is our situation that we need to understand. This is the situation we're in. We're confused. I don't know. Am I this? Am I that? Am I a man? Am I a woman? Am I American Indian? We have all these false conceptions of who we are. But ultimately we have to understand I'm dependent. I'm completely dependent upon the mercy of those more advanced than myself. And when we surrender to that and understand that, and then if we just start with that, who am I? Who is God? Help me. Then Krishna from within the heart, internally and externally, he'll guide us. But if we think that, no, I can figure this out on my own, it's very dangerous and we'll be lost. It's tricky because we need to use our intelligence and we need to think about things. We're not blindly just following whatever. There's a famous discussion that Prabhupada had devotees trying to understand about, did I fall from the spiritual world? Did I start someone else and I haven't got there? And they were going back and forth. Prabhupada would make a comment. Every now and then they'd turn to him and ask a question, and then they'd go on with their speculating. And then finally Prabhupada said, don't try to understand Krishna, just try to love Krishna. Because what little our brain is, cubic foot, half a cubic, whatever the size of the space, how much intelligence can we fit in this space when the world is physically much larger? Double the space, then you'd be double the smart, so much more intelligent. They say we only use 10% of our brain, so what if you could use more? So the point is that whatever we can come up with, we're always going to be limited. So if we surrender that and understand that, then we can reach out and seek that knowledge. So Prabhupada says, don't try to understand Krishna, just try to love Krishna. It doesn't mean we turn off our intelligence. I just heard a lecture recently where Prabhupada says we read the Bhagavatam to try to understand Krishna. We will never understand Krishna. But by trying to understand Krishna, we get purified, we make advancement. It's a little bit of not a conundrum, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that yes, we're dependent. We need information. We need knowledge from a higher source. We'll never be able to fully understand. If we were presented right now, here's all the knowledge, here's all the books, and we read them all, we'd never be able to understand them all. But the effort of trying to understand them is elevating, it's purifying. We learn some things and our mind expands. And So it's not that we don't try. We do try to exercise our intelligence to understand how should I think, what should I do. But deeply we understand that the only way I will actually be able to realize this knowledge is if Krishna gives me that understanding. It comes from within. So it's a little bit of a dichotomy, is that the right word? A paradox, right? We won't fully understand it, but we should try to understand it. But we should understand that, well, my trying is not going to give it to me. But we don't just sit back and say, no, I'm going to accept anything and do it. No, we need to study. We need to learn. We need to expand our knowledge. So anyway, those were the things that came out to me, other than this thunderbolt curse of the Brahmanas, that when one speaks only the truth, and you can experience this in your own life, just go through a period of not talking so much and making sure that everything you say is 100% factual and relevant. You'll learn that over time your speech will be more potent. People will take you more seriously. It will affect them. We see this, that the people who are powerful or are very influential, they choose their words very carefully. They don't just talk about anything and everything all the time. But aside from that thunderbolt curse of the Brahmas, which I don't know why that caught my attention, but so fortunately, probably fortunate that today people don't have the ability to issue these thunderbolt curses, because so many people would say so many things, but because they're not living to Brahminical standards, their words don't have this potency, and it's probably a good thing. Kali Yuga for most people. But anyway, I wanted to get your thoughts or any questions or what you think about this. Does any of this resonate or?
Great class. Yeah, and the purport said that the Vedic monarchy was not an autocratic monarchy. An autocrat is the head of an autocracy. And an autocracy is a government where one person has complete power. No, in the Vedic culture, they took not only advice from the Brahmins, but also from the Kshatriyas and the Vaishyas. Also, there was a whole cabinet. And as far as, as far as the curse, well, I won't go there, but the Aryan culture is the Vedic culture, it's born in ashram. The white Anglo-Saxon Protestant is not the Aryan race, and I guess that's about all I can say without any preparation.
Yeah, we talked about that. We touched on that a little bit last time here. The word Aryan. So modern, of course, I'm not a scholar, so I have to be careful saying things that I don't have the background in. But they call this Aryan invasion that came in India. The theory is they came from some other Nordic races and they years ago conquered India. It's all based on linguistics. They don't have any archaeological evidence. My theory is because Vedic culture, everything's cremated, there isn't much you're going to find when you dig things up, maybe some shards of things, but it's all kind of speculative, that there's no real solid evidence that India was invaded from some other culture and that was supplanted. So this idea of an Aryan, what they call the Aryan invasion based on these Nordic races, Aryan in Vedic times means one who's self-realized. There's nothing to do with the body. Doesn't mean you're from this culture, that culture. It means you understand that the soul is not this body. You're self-realized. You're God conscious. That's an Aryan. It's not one who's white or this or that or some other place. And that's clear when you study the Vedas. Yeah. That's very clear.
Prabhupada uses the term Aryan quite a bit, actually, through his scriptures in his Varnashram. And these people who are claiming that they represent that culture, they don't follow any religious principles, not one single one. So how can they claim to be?
Yeah, they can't. And there's no evidence that they ever came in India. I think you had it.
Thank you for sharing. Your words definitely have potency with me. they just trigger when you speak. It's just like lots of things come flooding in. Yeah, understanding Krishna, it was like understanding women. It's just like, it's not going to happen. So the best I can do is serve them. And like, as far as like the king not fulfilling his righteous duty and then everybody suffered, made me think of my own life. And it's just like, when I'm not doing the right thing, things just seem to be a mess. And the best thing I can do for anybody else is to work on my spiritual life, and that's giving and caring. I think the best thing you can do for anybody, even if they're across the world or maybe in another dimension, is to practice religious principles. I think it has like a butterfly effect. And although I don't think my mood is going to affect the weather, I definitely see it. Like, it's like sharing a smile, like it just cascades. And but yeah, that's what made me think of, is like, the best thing the king could do for anybody else is just to live by those religious principles, and it has like this trickle down effect. But I think we're all kings in a way. We're just in charge of different things.
It's a really good point, and it's very true that, and we can't see with these eyes, but if we could see, and I don't know what the right realm is, subatomic carnivals or auras or things, if we could see spiritually, we would see that there's tremendous potency coming out of every living entity. Why? Because there's a divine spark of Krishna there. And so it's absolutely true that what we do with our life affects you. You want to save the world, save yourself. And it's gonna affect people very deeply. I remember once I had a profound experience. We were doing Food for Life in Washington, D.C., and we go every day. And it was simple. There wasn't a lot of spiritual activity. It was just prasadam distribution. We had some books and play a kirtan, but it's basically just giving people prasadam, feeding people. And after some time, this one person came through, and they were just, I don't even remember exactly what they said, but they were just so happy, and they just said, "Thank you very much." I said, "Well, for what?" And they weren't talking about the food. It's just because I see your smile, and it just makes my day so much better. And it really struck me. I said, "It's just a smile." I didn't really understand, but the way that they presented it and the way they felt, I could see it actually affected them at a deep level. And so to your point, just being happy has a tremendous effect upon people. What to speak of what we say and what we do. Of course, those things have effects also. But when we're connected in the right way, it's powerful, and it does affect people. So that was a nice point. Thank you for raising that. And I've experienced in my life, when I'm not doing things properly, everything gets out of whack. It's like a nice example with the king and diseased people because the king's not acting right. And we all have that. We're all spiritually sitting in your heart of hearts. The reason you exist and what makes your heart beat is because Supersoul, there's a fragment of Krishna living in your heart, and that makes your heart and body a temple. It's very powerful. So thank you for that. That's nice. Yes, for the microphone here.
Thank you so much. Something you've said was soul has a right for happiness. In fact, its nature is to be eternally happy.
It is
right.
happy.
And interestingly, clicked in my head is in Declaration of Independence. It says you have a right to pursue happiness. So if there is water, you say you have a right for water. If somebody says you have a right to pursue water, doesn't necessarily mean there is water.
Yeah.
So the soul comes in this world, declares independence, and says, "I'm going to pursue happiness." It's just clicked. Really interesting.
Yeah, we have a right to pursue it, but it's like you shouldn't have come here. Now you got to pursue it. You actually already have it. You're pursuing something you already have. Yes.
Well, I wanted to maybe add in on that. It's like that line, liberty, the three things, right?
And pursuit of justice, happiness,
life, liberty, pursuit of happiness.
Yeah.
But so actually that I think Thomas Jefferson wrote that, but originally it's from John Locke, who wrote the fundamental rights of human beings as right, liberty, property. And for some reason, the founding fathers didn't want to put property in there, so they replaced it with pursuit of happiness. And we don't know exactly the reason why. But originally, John Locke, it was right, liberty, property. Interesting. That was his philosophy.
Yeah, it's interesting, and that is interesting. And I'm not a historian, but I'm pretty sure that in the founding fathers in that time, property was a huge thing. If you had property, you had a voice. You existed. If you didn't have property, you didn't exist. You didn't matter. And so I can just speculate and see why they may have changed it that way, because if they left that in, then it opens the doors for all kinds of people. And it's like, no, there's an us and them. We property holders are going to control you who don't have it, because that's the way it was back then. If you had property, you actually had a voice. And if you didn't have property, you were like an ant in the street. You just didn't exist. And I'm using words loosely, but that was sort of how things were. And so that's interesting. But again, these laws, these constitution, these are all man-made things, and they're trying their best to get it right, but it's coming from a limited perspective, which is what this purport's talking about. We need to accept the laws from Manu, which ultimately are property structure. Yes.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that quote by Jefferson, where that he just says all men are created equal, and so here on the marge makes this point that when Jefferson said that, or wrote that down, it wasn't true necessarily on a material level. There were slaves in America. Yeah. All men were not created equal on the material platform. But Marge makes the point that on a spiritual level, yes, it's true. And perhaps our founder acharyas of America had that vision to some extent, at least.
Yeah.
Some spiritual tinge to it. I mean, other things you said is definitely very religious and spiritual.
Yeah.
And of course, he also says how the right for religion to practice or not practice religion. There's a whole thing about that. Yeah. One should not be persecuted based on that. I mean, that was the whole reason why the Pilgrims
yeah, that's why they came. Get out of the king.
But I was also reflecting that, even though it's only like 250 years ago, and these founding fathers were there, and they're not like Vaishnava or whatever, but there was some piety, there's some spirituality where they were able to think of these things and establish a country based on it. So, but yeah, it's only going downhill. But but it's like we see glimpses of principles of Vedic culture everywhere. Yeah,
yeah, it's true, and I think they did have some level of piety or spiritual consciousness. I think they understood the soul as equal, and they definitely did have that. There's some, and you can see it, the evidence. It's interesting in the Bhagavatam, I forget which canto, there's a description of how certain kings who couldn't live up to the Vedic culture we're talking about, they were, I don't know if kicked out's the right word, but basically it's like, okay, you're not doing things according to it, so you need to go. And so they would go off to other countries and form their kingdoms. And there's a list Prabhupada gives of different countries. Okay, so this one went here and this one went there. And then those governments evolved in a different direction, and maybe it didn't look Vedic, but ultimately this Vedic culture is deeply ingrained everywhere. You can see traces of it. It's just based on our conditioning. Some people follow it more closely and others don't. So then you have different countries and different governments and ideologies that look completely different. But if you look deep, you'll see most of them have seeds coming from. Because ultimately, when we say Vedic culture, it was the whole planet lived under one ruler with one culture. And there may have been differences based on climate or different things, but it's ultimately one culture. And then as Kali Yuga sets in, it starts fragmenting. and getting different. But yeah, it's not all. It's not that they're in complete ignorance. And the founding fathers, my understanding is many of them. I don't know most, or a lot of them were Christians. They believed in God. The government never said this whole idea of church and state. They never said it had to be separate like that. They weren't going to force it on anybody. But it didn't. Today, it means that government can't support church. It's like, well, no, it never. They didn't say that. They just said we won't force you. You can belong or not, but it doesn't mean we can't support you. So yeah, it's been twisted. Yes.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much for bringing up, this idea of, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm not American, I'm dependent. And part of the Krishna conscious process is coming to surrender to authority. Something that I'm really curious about, something that is always sort of a paradox for me in Krishna consciousness is like, this is the hospital, right? And so, we have all sorts of people who are in all sorts of positions within like ISKCON, for example, who are not at this level of like King Prabhu, right? Like there's always this kind of tension between what we speak about in these Bhagavatam classes and then how people are actually operating, as we're working together and as we're cooperating. And something that is a struggle for me personally, this is a very personal struggle, is that my resistance to authority is actually what brought me to Krishna consciousness, because resisting the authority of material leaders who are not, exhibiting this level of piousness protected me long enough so that, instead of just continuing in the material story, I actually made it here. And so now I'm struggling because there's, a level of discernment that I feel like I have cultivated, but in Krishna consciousness, it feels like there's this, like, if someone is senior to you, you just cede to their authority. But sometimes I have instincts and intuitions that go against what that authority is saying. And I'm finding that and then sometimes, I do the thing where I'm like, okay, they're my senior and I'm just going to do whatever it is that they have asked me to do. And then it plays out in this way where I'm like, I wish I would have listened to my intuition instead. So I'm just curious. I would love for you to comment on that.
Wow. Okay. That's a chance for me to get into trouble here. That's a good thing. That'll protect me right there. Sorry, I don't have time. Can we? So yeah, it is a hospital, and one thing to understand that it is a hospital, and one thing that really struck me as a relatively young devotee is a statement Bhaktivinoda Thakur made, and I don't remember where he made it, but basically to the effect of just because someone puts on a dhoti and tilak doesn't mean they're a devotee. And it just like shattered my world when I heard that. I said, yeah, but your temple, everyone's just pure, And he said, well, a lot of people dress up as sheep and they're wolves in sheep clothing or something, it's like, and so then when you study Prabhupada's books, you say, he kind of says the same thing, that when we say authorities and we say, devotees, that's based on their behavior. It's not necessarily just based on their title or their position. There is a hierarchy, and we have to have some authority, because if whoever's in charge said, hey, can you do this, and everybody ignored him, well, you couldn't run a program. The projects wouldn't work. But on a deeper level, we have this triangle. What's the triad? Guru, Sadhu, Shastra. So the authority, whoever that may be, says one thing. Well, we see, is that consistent with what's in the scriptures? What do other devotees say? What is that consistent with the spiritual master? And unfortunately, in ISKCON, sometimes spiritual masters aren't always. We just heard recently over the years, there have been spiritual masters who have kind of gone astray because of whatever reason. So we always have this triangle. Well, I heard this from here, so does that match with over here and over here? And if everything's consistent, then I can feel, okay, I feel safe, I can surrender to this. So we don't give up our discernment. It's tricky because we can't always trust our intelligence. But Super Soul is there in the heart. And Prabhupada says this very clearly. Nice purport for Bhagavad Gita 10.10. And other places he says that even if we may not have the intellectual ability to understand everything, from within the heart, Krishna will guide us if we're sincere. So so I can just speak to principles. In specific instances, case by case, there's going to be different details. But the ultimate authority is Krishna. Krishna, you're guiding me. And if I'm surrendered to that, then I do the best I can to see, okay, is what I'm reading and what I'm hearing and what I'm experiencing, are they in alignment? Or is there something off? Something here is different, or something like, if they're not in alignment, then okay, then something's off. Let me figure out what's off. And then adjust. Maybe internally I'm thinking something wrong, or maybe externally what I'm hearing is wrong. But we just need to be looking for that alignment. Are these three things consistent? And ultimately, Krishna guide me. Who should I listen to? And you'll hear, even today, you'll talk to senior devotees in the 30s, and they'll give you much different advice, because we all have a different perspective, psychophysical makeup. And so we have to find, okay, well, what works for me? I know I have a nice relationship with my spiritual master. I feel like I'm connected in my spiritual world. I've seen other spiritual masters talk to their disciples, and I know they're pure, and the disciple's pure, the spiritual master pure. It's like, wow, that would never work for me. I just wouldn't be able to do it. And so, but they need that, and they can do it, and they're more advanced than I. Like, it's not a question of this is better than that. It's a question of we're all different. It's just like a doctor doesn't give one prescription for everybody. Each patient gets a different prescription because we have different diseases. So there's different. I guess what comes to mind is something I heard from Ranjan Raj, which was really nice. Had a long discussion with him about form and substance. And Rupa Goswami talks about this. The substance is important. The form, the details, they may vary. So this may look different than this on the surface, but if you look deeper, they're following the same principle. So we have to, when we see these things that appear to be off, something is like, this doesn't resonate or something, are we focused on the form or the substance? Is it the detail of how to do something, or is it the kind of essence, the principle behind it? And I know that's kind of abstract, but if we just think in those terms, substance means, Krishna is the absolute truth. The holy name, the Maha Mantra has, if we chant the Maha Mantra sincerely, that's all we need. That's substance. Now, how we do that, that's form. When one devotee may do it in one way, another devotee may do it another way, but ultimately they're both following the same substance. So then a lot of times I find when I get these perplexes, oh, this person's saying that, I don't know. I'm looking at the form. And it's like, well, it doesn't really matter. What he's saying might work over there, and it might not work over here, but the substance underneath, is that different? And oftentimes, actually, the substance isn't, so it doesn't really matter. So I know that's all hypothetical. I don't know if that helps you at all, but that's what I would come up with in 4 minutes. One hand, and I'm going over time. So we can take offline, we can talk, I can stay for a few minutes.
So it was that realm of ideas.
Right. Kantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.